What's up, everybody? It's Spencer Alessi, and this is the Esports Narrative. What does B.O.O.M stand for? Is the esports industry in a bubble? How do we continue to close the gap on those who know nothing about esports and raging fans? The Esports Industry Awards. Popularity contest or actually valuable? Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good night. Welcome to episode 37 of the Esports Narrative. I am your host, Spencer Alessi. This is the podcast that's all about the exploration of competitive video gaming and the passionate communities that make it so exciting. Tonight, I have a very special guest. I always have special guests, but tonight I have Maurice Eisenmann on the show. He is at Mr. Eisenmann on Twitter. He works in community and culture for WHAM Network. He has a podcast of his own, an esports podcast of his own called the B.O.O.M Podcast. Definitely check that out. He's creating awesome work. He's doing some really great things with WHAM Network. I'm super excited to have him here with us tonight to talk all about esports and Overwatch and all that good stuff. All right, so tonight we have Maurice Eisenmann. How you doing, man? How's it going? How is life? How is work? Super happy to have you here tonight.
It's going great. Spencer. Thank you so much for having me on. I am a longtime listener. I think the first episode I heard from you was with Marty from Splice, and since then I've been listening. So I'm happy to be on as well.
Awesome. Super grateful and appreciate you being such a long-time listener. That was episode 5, I believe it was, that I did that with him, and this is now episode 37. And just super appreciate you and all the listeners who have stuck with me thus far, and for all the new listeners, thank you, and I appreciate it. And I hope this will be another episode that brings a lot of value to people and entertainment and all sorts of good stuff. So really appreciate it. So first, I want to get into, we'll talk about what you do professionally, at WHAM Networks, and you have a podcast of your own about the esports industry. But first, let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about your story of how did you get into video games? What was it like when you were young and growing up with video games? Did you have them? Did you not? And ultimately, tell us how you got into esports.
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting story. I was born and raised in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and this was at a time where I would say ESL just started. I was in my teens, and ESL was primarily in Germany, and you didn't really have esports in Holland, or at least professional esports. So, I threw LAN parties, 100 plus people would come, and it would just be fun and small tournaments, particularly Smash, some FIFA stuff, and very basic. So I loved bringing the community together. And for my work, actually, I founded a music production company. So I'm not a talented musician, but I could pick out talented musicians, and I was able to pitch their songs to labels. So it allowed me to travel a lot. Went to Hong Kong, went to China, was able to record records there. And slowly there, I started seeing more and more of esports. So eventually I moved to the States for my music. So that was about 6 years ago. And I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, I found out that esports is this thing that you could do professionally. Like there are people making a living, and there are companies like MLG and ESL doing this incredible stuff, providing these incredible tournaments. And that was a moment when it kind of hit me. I thought that I would have to kind of push away the music stuff, which was going really well, but I just wasn't too passionate about it. And I would have to pursue my passion. And so I sold my stake in the company, left the company, and basically pursued esports full time. I mean, it was tough in the beginning. I worked, odd and odd jobs, some small jobs for ESL, for some other tournament organizers. But I really saw that there were tons of. I was also finishing up college at the time, and I wrote my thesis paper on why this was the time for traditional sports teams to get into esports. And this was, once again, 4 or 5 years ago. So I realized that there are tons of people in the industry that have tremendous traditional sports experience. I mean, there are all these sports teams. There's a core group of people that have great esports experience and esports knowledge, but I figured that there aren't a lot of people that have both. So I got accepted into Columbia University's Sports Management Master's program in New York. So I attended that, and that really opened the doors for me because the program was incredible and it taught me everything about traditional sports. And at that point, all these traditional sports companies reached out to me and said, hey, your professors have been talking, we need someone that knows a little bit about the space that can help us explain the basics. So that luckily brought me to companies like Bayern Munich. They're one of the best soccer teams in the world. Helped them out. I did some early stuff with NBA 2K before they even announced the NBA 2K League. I did some stuff with Prodigy Sports. We launched the first ever traditional sports company to move into esports recruiting. So they're a big traditional sports recruiting company. They now have a flourishing esports arm as well. And worked with the Greek Basketball Association. Worked with some other stuff, other companies, and then I worked with WHAM a little bit until our CEO Gary, he said like, I really like what you're doing, and we need someone like you on the inside. So that's when I kind of moved away from the freelance esports work, working project to project, and I started working full time at WHAM.
Awesome. So, real quick, when you were growing up, were you a gamer growing up, or what was your first exposure to video games? I'm curious.
Absolutely. My first exposure to video games was it was kind of a sad note, but it brought a lot of positivity. I had to go to America, not for myself, but a family member was undergoing some medical stuff. So we went to America for a week for treatment, and I remember there was I didn't really play a lot of video games in Amsterdam, but I remember there was a PlayStation 1, and, the SNES and that type of stuff wasn't really around, so I missed that, but I saw this PS1, and it was Crash Bandicoot, and I played the game, and I know this is the best experience I've ever had in my life. Like, this is incredible, and since that day, I remember coming back home and just bothering, my parents like an annoying kid can do, and I just bothered them I want an N64 or a PlayStation something because this is an incredible experience, and that experience was so that experience changed my life because ever since then I've been gaming so much, and it's become a key part of my identity, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you do professionally for WHAM right now? I know on your Twitter it says community and culture. So what is that, and what do you do?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So at WHAM, for those of you who don't know, so WHAM is a soon to launch network dedicated to gaming. So kind of the culture and lifestyle of gaming. So as broad as you can think of it. So we'll be soft launching on Twitch hopefully by the end of this year, but we'll be on all OTT platforms, some cable TV all around the world. So we're very, very excited, and you'll hear much more about us soon. But basically, as a director of community and culture, it's a pretty vague title, but that's there on purpose. Basically, I'm the liaison, so kind of the connection between the esports world and esports and gaming world, but particularly esports and the network. So let's say we need, talents on shows. So I'll try to arrange that, try to get people to casting that represent the culture. I'm kind of this this filter that tries to make sure that whatever content we're bringing out is somehow in tune with the culture. And then at the same time, I manage our esports partnerships. So we have content with some of the top esports teams, some traditional sports teams, and some partners. So all the esports content goes through me. So basically everything before and after production, which has to do with esports, I have a hand in, and I filter that. And then in particularly, we have some incredibly talented people with an esports background on our production team. But before and after, that's my job.
Awesome. So where is the headquarters for WHAM?
So our headquarters are in Burbank, California, which is like the center of TV.
Do you work remotely?
I have an office in New York, so I work in Midtown.
Okay.
And hopefully, our plan is that at launch, I'll be hiring some people in Midtown as well.
Awesome.
So so right now it's just me in the New York office, but a month or two from now, I'll have some people to work on to help me relieve some of my projects.
Nice. So I want to dig into some of these questions, but I do want to hear about what you're doing with your podcast, B.O.O.M. First of all, what does B.O.O.M stand for? Why did you start it? And what is it all about? What are you trying to achieve with your podcast?
Yeah, so Esports B.O.O.M, basically my co-host Anton Ferraro and Anton is an incredible guy, has been working in esports for 15 years, MLG, Azubu, and really someone that I draw a lot of inspiration from. We were talking one day, and we're like, there's so many incredible esports podcasts out there, whether it's your podcast, Spencer, whether it's the ESPN esports podcast, but they primarily focus on, stories of individuals. So, interviews and those type of stories. But there isn't really a podcast that goes through kind of the business side, goes through the weekly esports business stories and just give hot takes and give commentary from people that are working in the industry. So, I remember we just looked at each other and we're like, why not do it ourselves? So Esports B.O.O.M, I mean, it's kind of a joke because there's this whole joke like esports is exploding and like, so B.O.O.M is a joke, but it stands for business or other musings. So it's basically comes down to just a weekly podcast. Usually it's Anton and I. We're having some guests on lately. We just go over the esports news and we give you commentary from a industry perspective.
Awesome. I really love it. And I love that name. It's super catchy. The branding is super cool. And you make a perfect segue into one of my first questions for you, which is, why is esports exploding now as opposed to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years from now? Like, why is it exploding just now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think, yes, you're right. Esports is exploding right now, but I think it's been brewing, right? I think esports has been growing exponentially for the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So every year, if you look at it, it's been growing a lot. But there's this great theory that I like called the lily pond theory. So that basically says, let's say, you have every day the number of lily ponds falling into a river doubles, and the river can have maximum of 30 lily ponds. So how long does it take before the river is full? How many days? How many days does it take before half of the river is full? So the answer is the day before the last, because it doubles every day, right? So it's half full one day, and then the second day it's full. So I think that's the same with esports, and the same is like it's been doubling every year. But I think right now we're at the time where the river is getting full. We're getting to that moment where everything the mainstream explodes, and I think it's just it has to do with a lot of things. I think the I think a main driver is the fact that traditional sports is declining. So, NFL ratings are going down, traditional, TV ratings are going down, whereas esports is growing. And I think there are tons of traditional sports companies that over the past couple of years have been looking at esports and have kind of, shaken their head and not looked at it much. But now, because they're seeing audiences moving away from traditional sports going to esports, or doing both at the same time, so not just watching the NBA, but watching, spending half of their time watching the NBA and the other half of the time watching the NALCS. So all of a sudden, these traditional sports companies are taking interest. And as soon as that happens, as soon as all these investments started happening and franchising and all that type of stuff, that just, has the potential of bringing it to the next level.
Do you like the direction it's going right now? Do you think that we're at a macro? Do you like the direction things are going right now?
I think it's not a question whether I like it or I think it's necessary. So obviously I love the like the Smash communities of the world that are like these do-it-yourself communities. The publishers are not really interested in it that much, and there are all these personalities in this local grassroots scene. I really love that, and I think that's really incredible. On the other hand, if you want to have things like Worlds, the LCSs of the world, the majority of esports teams are losing money. They're burning through cash. So it's really necessary to have a franchise model similar to traditional sports, because that takes away the risks of possibly, moving down to, let's say, challenger or relegating. And there's revenue split similar to what you have in the NBA and the NFL. So, it's a risky time. I don't, for instance, I have more faith in the NALCS than I have in the OWL. So on one hand, I think it's scary because you have all these brands putting in so much money into esports, all these companies buying these spots. On the other hand, I think it's incredible that we're finally getting a infrastructure that enables esports teams as companies and they're to finally start making money, making a profit. I think that's incredibly necessary for our community to grow.
What is this esports bubble, right? Like, so there's this buzzword, bubble, the internet bubble, the .com bubble. There's people who talk about this. What is this esports bubble, and is this something that is legitimately happening right now, or is it just the creation of infrastructure that is making it look like that?
Depends. I think this is kind of similar to the internet in like the end of the 90s, early 2000s, where there's a lot of empty air. So there are a lot of companies that are quote unquote esports companies that are getting massive amounts of money that don't deserve it. A great example is, you can all these esports ICOs nowadays making millions and millions of dollars that, people that are in the industry, like, you and I, when we look at those white papers, we see that they're probably not going to make any money, and it's probably very close to a scam. So also, there's a lot of dumb money coming into the space. So there are a lot of investors, just investing in esports companies because they want to add the word esports to their portfolio. So in that sense, it's a bubble because I think tons of people are going to lose money. On the other hand, I think that the teams, the orgs and their owners are incredibly bright people. And I think that the main infrastructure of esports is being built and is growing, and I don't think that's a bubble. I think that will survive. I think there's a lot of fat surrounding it that probably won't.
So we've talked about some of the reasons why the esports industry is making tremendous ground nowadays, but what's lacking or what's lagging behind right now in esports?
That's a good question. I can only guess. If I knew the answer to that, I would probably start the company to answer that problem and make a lot of money. But I think I worked with a lot of brands. So from a brand sponsorship partnership perspective, when you're looking at traditional sports teams, their metrics are on point. They know exactly, or they give a very good estimation of what your ROI is, what the reach of your brand partnership is. Nielsen will give the numbers of the viewership and stuff like that. And with esports, it's interesting because we're talking about a digitally native sport, so you're expecting this all these metrics to be even better. And the problem is it hasn't been this way. There are companies like Waypoint TV and Twitch, for instance, by themselves are starting to work on these type of metrics and helping to make that easier. I think that's still lacking, but I think a year or two from now we'll get to the point where we'll be ways ahead of traditional sports when it comes to delivering those metrics and those exact ROIs to brands.
And we should be, as an industry, able to engage with the esports or even the larger video game audience in a different way, in a different scalable, interactive way because of the digital nativeness of that. And you work with a lot of brands, you said. I'm assuming you work with a lot of people who maybe don't know that esports exists. How have you seen that kind of progress over the years of people who know nothing about esports versus raging fans, and how do you think we can continue to close that gap?
Oh, that's great. I'll answer your question first from a brand perspective and then from an audience perspective. So from a brand perspective, it's night and day. 4 years ago, when I was talking to sports teams or brands, their commercial partners, 99% of our meeting would be just explaining what esports is. And the other 1% would be, hey, this is why we should get into this now. And usually they would end, the meeting with scratching their head and not taking it seriously. Now, when we as WHAM talk with brands, the conversation is completely different. It's coming to us and saying, yes, we know esports, we want to get into the space. And they're much more educated. And obviously, it's still very shallow education, but they know the basics. From an audience perspective, I think what we really need in esports, and it's become kind of a cliche, is kind of content that is appealing to a mainstream audience. So this is really tough because, if you're making esports content, generally you cater to the hardcore fans. So if you make Hearthstone content, you generally make content that's focused just hardcore Hearthstone fans can enjoy. So one of the things that we trying to do at WHAM, and you'll see once our content launches, our content really is engaging for a more mainstream audience. So content that is especially interesting for a gaming audience or for an esports audience, but is interesting enough for a mainstream audience to enjoy. And I think tons of people will follow. I think the OWL, the NBA 2K League, and the NALCS, now that they're all franchising and now that all of these sports and media people are getting in, I think we're going to see an explosion over the next 2 to 3 years of incredible evergreen content that focuses on engaging a mainstream audience. A great example is, ESPN's 30 for 30. I don't like American football. I like the original football, soccer. So when I see a game in a bar, I turn it off. I ask them to put on something else. But when I see a story on ESPN 30 for 30 of a football player who comes from a broken home, who builds himself up through football, and who is this incredible personality and helps his community and is the pride of his community, I'll watch it because it's human interest stories, and and it really captivates, my attention. I think we're getting to that point where esports content won't just be about how do you get better at CSGO, or like how do the CSGO pros train, or here's the 100th like house video where you see our training house. I think we're getting to the point where esports content is going to evolve and it's going to be attractive to that mainstream audience.
Yeah, that's something that I know a number of people that I've spoken with are super passionate about, is the storyline. I mean, the nature of my podcast narrative is indicative of just that. Like, I'm super passionate about the storytelling nature behind esports and telling those tremendously inspiring upbringing stories of, a lot of the CSGO players in Europe and things like that, coming from nothing. And like, a lot of the Dota players, have gotten coverage recently because of the international, and they have tremendous stories. And
so Elic did that really well. And they had those, I think, a 4-part series on Dota, which was really good. And, I can just talk from personal experience. I mean, we talk with heads of content of all these esports teams and their executives, and we talk with the players. And sometimes you're just sitting down with them and you're having a conversation. And I tell them, like, you're this great Halo player or this great CSGO player. How come a kid in like Ireland that lives in a town with like 1,000 people is now like one of the top Call of Duty players? And they will tell their story and how they got there, and I'm just sitting there amazed.
So is this? Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm really curious on do the organizations understand how powerful this content could be and how widespread reaching and organically reaching this content could be? Do they get it? Are they thinking about this and solving this problem of creating more content?
So I think it's a luxury. I think when you're a starting org, or when you're like an org without serious investment, your main focus with content is like, we have to keep our fans happy. We have to keep, the day one fans happy. Like, we have a limited budget, we're losing money, and like, this is what we have to keep happy. We have to keep them happy. I think once, most of the teams we talk with are like more of the top teams that have, that kind of investment. So they now have money to hire a head of content that has traditional TV experience. They have the money to invest money in creating a kind of a more experimental kind of content. Great example is Team Liquid. They, with Hungrybox, they have a great like food show called, and One Up Studios, that's their production arm.
Familiar,
They have a great like food show with Hungrybox called like Hungry as F. I'm not sure if I can curse, but
no worries.
So and it's just funny because here's Hungrybox, this incredibly charismatic guy, and like, it isn't a show about how good he is at Smash. It's like having what's it called? Richard Sherman, from the NFL. He has a show that has nothing to do with the NFL. Absolutely. Just because he's a charismatic guy and people want to figure out, like, want to know more about what they like. And it's, it's funny, and it has nothing to do with esports. Maybe there's some, tie-in, food, focusing on food that like he eats before and after, tournaments.
My thesis on that is that every esports organization should be a media company. I believe that every esports organization could be producing vlogs or short 7 to 12 to 15 minute pieces every single day around what their players are interested in. Maybe it's snowboarding or skateboarding or paintball or cooking or knitting. I don't know, but creating this micro content around that for purpose of branding and exposure and things like that. And I honestly, from my perspective, I don't think it costs that much. I'm curious what your perspective is on the production end of it. Now, there's a difference between having production value and having valuable production, right? Like, you can create really good content, and it could be bad lighting, it could be like shaky camera, and that can do really well. And the really well produced content like the ESPN 30 for 30 can do really well. I'm curious on your perspective on like the nuances between the two, and if it's okay to do one or versus the other, or that kind of thing.
I think when you're starting org, and even when you're an established org like Optic, I mean, Optic does both, right? Optic is one of the best in like branding and content. They have their like vlogs, which is just like Hector and the players just vlogging, like camera in front of them style, and then they have their like weekly, more in-depth documentary-esque series that are highly produced. I think traditional TV, they are spending way too much money to create high quality content.
100% for sure.
On the there's so much waste coming up. Like we have conversations with like these traditional TV companies, and they're like, "Oh, so your budget is X," and we're like, "No, it's a quarter of that. Like we don't need anything. Like it's gonna look beautiful, and we don't need that much." And on the other hand, you have, you know, like you said, the shaky camera stuff, which is good, but it'll be tough to engage a more mainstream audience. I think for the daily vlogs, like you said, or weekly vlogs, like it doesn't matter. Just have just buy a cheap camera and like record it, and it's very, you know, face to face. But once you want to do a little bit more, like we said, the Hungry Box show, that's at the point where you need to invest a little bit more. And quite frankly, when it comes to esports orgs, there are not a lot of orgs that have the money to do that. I think if you just go on ESPN and ESPN Esports and you type in like investment, you'll see all the orgs that have gotten a bunch of money lately. Those are the orgs that have the money to take these types of risks. And for most of them, it's paying out.
Do you think, I want to sit on this topic for a minute, because it's something that I'm super passionate about, and I want to like kind of mull this over a little bit and go a little bit deeper. So what do you think it takes so like Optic, right? They've got a full-time camera guy. He actually just won an award at the Esports Industry Awards, right? Hitch. They've got a full-time producer, video producer, editor, that kind of thing. So they've got one full-time person. I'm not fully super aware of their setup and how they roll and things like that, but what do you think it takes personnel-wise to create some of this more produced content, like what Optic is doing or what Liquid is doing with the Hungry Box show?
Yeah, I don't think there's a magic number, because some orgs do wonders with like, you know, one camera guy. It just depends on what you can do. So obviously, if you're, you know, with a couple people like Optic and One Up Studios, which, you know, are 4 or 5, you know, very talented people as far as I know, you can do tremendous work. But on the other hand, you're like limited in what you can do. Like you can't do a set show, right? Because, you know, you need to build a set, you need to have a studio. So it really depends on what you want to do. I think, you know, most esports orgs most good esports orgs or esports orgs with large amounts of investments have investments from traditional sports organizations. So the Optic, I think, have an investment from the Rangers. So just using that as an example, you bet you that like the Rangers have a full-on production staff.
Sure.
Like this is now also Optic's production staff. Like they can utilize that staff if they want to build up their production. So that obviously gives tremendous amount of opportunity to these orgs. So it's, you know, you can do a lot with a small number of people, but you can take more risks, and there are more things you can do with a larger staff. So there's no magic number. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to do a documentary show, you don't need a lot of people. If you want to do a set show, you'll need a bit more people. So it just depends on the type of content you want to make. Before, orgs were restrained with the type of content they could make, whether it's financial, whether it's the staff that they have, the equipment, or whatever. Nowadays, that gets much easier. So I think you'll see more and more orgs take risks with the type of content they make and make more, bigger content that they couldn't make before.
We talked about investment from traditional sports. You've mentioned it a couple times. I've mentioned it a couple times in this episode. But so Jerry Jones paid, what was it, $140 million for the Dallas Cowboys in 1989. They're now worth almost $5 billion, like $4.8 billion the Cowboys are worth now, supposedly. Is that what these traditional sports owners are looking at? They're like, well, we could go from $100 million investment to $4 billion, and that's our ROI in, however many years that is. Is that what these traditional owners are looking at?
I hope not, because the problem with the good thing with the Cowboys is that they're, it's one game, it's one league, and that game will stay popular for 50 years or however long Jerry Jones' investment has been. So all of a sudden, it just becomes more and more valuable as more and more fans come to games, as more and more people want to watch it on TV. So you can build like a one team that has this much value. You can't do that with esports because the LCS might be popular for the next 20 years, but there's going to be a time when there gets a big game pops up, and that can be 5 years from now, that can be 10 years from now, that can be next year, or that can be 20 years from now. But it goes a lot faster than traditional sports. So I think two good examples of what smarter sports teams are doing, I think most of them are moving to this direction, is I think it's called Vision Esports. It's the holding company of Echo Fox.
Yep. With the Yankees and
yeah, exactly. So that's a great example. So they are going to use the Echo Fox brand to build all these other companies. So their main brand is the team, and they're gonna be in LCS, and they're gonna be in the future franchise league and PUBG, and they're gonna be in all these upcoming games to stay relevant and stay important. But then they have a tournament company, then they have a media company that makes shows. They're probably gonna have products. They're gonna have all these extra companies. Maybe they're gonna have like a tutor, an esports tutoring company or whatever they can use.
Yeah, so that's super smart.
So they're going to use that company to that brand, that Echo Fox brand, to build out all these companies. So that's how you build value. Because let's say the LCS 10 years from now, no one gives a crap about that anymore. Now, that's fine because they're on all these other games and they have because the Echo Fox brand still is important. They can use that for all these other companies. So I think most smart esports orgs and traditional sports owners are kind of taking that model.
Now I want to transition a little bit and talk about the Overwatch League. So the first thing I want to talk about is, do you think it's a good thing to create geolocated brands for the esports industry that is, global by its, very nature?
That's a really good question. That's the $20 million question.
Of course.
I honestly think it's not. I love franchising. I think we need franchising. It sucks for the second tier and third tier orgs that are working their ass off to get an Overwatch team that's relatively competitive, and now all of a sudden they know they can't get into the best league. That sucks for them. But it is important, like we talked about before, for these leagues to make money and to get return on their investment. So I think franchising is great. Geolocation, I'm not such a big fan because of what you mentioned. Esports is a global league, but I do see the value of it. So it just matters, like, what is your expectation coming in? If your expectation is to fill 100 person, let's say for Overwatch, to fill 100 person, your practice room of your sports stadium, and there are 100 people in there, and you fill that every Sunday, and it's like a studio, right? It's like a 100 person studio that you fill with Overwatch fans, and you just want to involve the local community, and you want to get local brands to invest. That's great. And And that's fine because the international fans will still watch, and you might be able to get local fans that support your team just because they're from that state or that city. However, if your plan is to, like we talked about before, become the next NFL, next NBA, and to fill thousands and thousands of people every week, esports isn't that way. At least not for a long shot for the next couple years. And the problem with esports is that you might get, Overwatch might be the hot esports now, but 5-6 years from now it isn't. So I think I'm not such a fan of geolocation, but I would love to be proven wrong, and I would love for the Overwatch League to succeed, and I would love for geolocation to succeed in esports, even if it's just for the fact that a local esports system can work, because that would be great for us. I do think there's a lot of potential for local kind of amateur and collegiate esports. So like your local Overwatch team, like, let's say you're from Buffalo, so like your local Buffalo esports, amateur team where you get together and play with friends against a team from a city next to you, like you have in soccer, like you have in baseball. So I think there's a lot of potential for that. But I would love for local esports to work, because that will be great for us, and that will be great to build a community. I just don't think it'll work to the extent that a lot of these traditional sports owners are thinking it will.
So what's the downside to this? Like, let's say you're right, and a lot of the people who have been talking about this vocally are right, it doesn't work out. Like, what's the end result? Like, you think this dissolves, or like, what's the end result of this not working?
I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think. So first of all, the Overwatch League might be a success relatively. Like, they might not make money from like local tickets, but they might make their money back on in-game sales of items. Like, as you've seen, each of these Overwatch League teams will have a home and away kit. Obviously, as a fan, you'll be able to buy that in-game. I'm assuming the Overwatch League teams will get the majority of that money. So that you can obviously make a lot of money if you get fans. I think that if the Overwatch League fails, it'll have a ripple effect for our industry. I think, some orgs that have sold 70% of their company to buy into the league, or however much percent, the majority of their company to buy into the Overwatch League, will now have close to nothing. I think that'll be very bad for those orgs. It might set back our industry, and it might be kind of a reset button. But just like the internet in like the late 90s, like when the internet bubble exploded, we still got Facebook, we still got, Apple, still this huge company. You still have these titans coming out of it. I think it will be the same with esports. Like, the smart people will be able to adapt, and they will be able to become bigger than you can ever imagine. It's just I think a lot of the smaller companies and the orgs that are betting on one league will be the ones to take the hit.
What gotchas should we, as an industry of creators, streamers, players, teams, organizations, what should we watch out for as things that we should make sure we don't fall down the rabbit hole of, or make sure there's things that we watch out for? What gotchas should we be watching out for?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's important to be realistic. Don't oversell your brand. I mean, I saw these stories of like these esports teams that I've never heard of, like, get a lot of money to be bought out by like sports teams that just want to get into esports. That's only going to hurt you long term. I think a certain type of regulation is necessary. So I think it's important for players, especially in the NALCS and in the OWL, that now have a lot more bargaining power, because now they're just one. Now, before they could be pushed away like this. Now all of a sudden they're going to become these superstars in this league. I think it's important for them to show their voice. And when they don't like something in the league, come together, whether it's a union, an official union, whether it's an unofficial union, get together and show your voice. And I mean, this is so important. What I'm going to say now is, if you're a streamer that's making money, if you're a professional player, get an accountant and get a lawyer, because those things are so incredibly important. There's so many streamers, so much talent that we work with, or that I've worked with in the past, that don't have their legal stuff in order. They just buy a logo online and they don't have that paperwork, and then all of a sudden they get popular, and then the graphic designer that they bought the logo for $40 is like, hey, we never had a contract, and now wants to have a lot more money. They don't have an accountant, and they screw up with their taxes, the prize money that they win, and they don't pay taxes on it, and it's only going to hurt you in the back later on when you're even more popular. So get a lawyer and get an accountant.
This is kind of an interesting one. It's a little out of left field, but I felt like you might be good to talk about this with, and it's related to the Star Wars Battlefront 2 debacle that was going around Reddit and the internet. Are you familiar with kind of what happened, or are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that was with was it Darth Vader with their it was basically pay to get the actual content that they expected to get from the beginning, right?
Yeah, so I think it was like you could play like 60 hours or 40 hours or something like that to unlock it, or there was like, the pay to play kind of thing where you could unlock it. And the internet was just up in storm about it. Reddit it was like the most downvoted comment on Reddit. It was trending, it was everything. And then I believe it was like 15 minutes later, they reverted back and like changed their mind and like said they were going to change it or something like that. How do you feel about that whole model in general of like the pay to play versus free to play, like StarCraft and their timely commercial? I don't know if you saw it, but like, what are your opinions on that?
So pay to play, I do not like when it comes to the actual, like, let's say you have an esports title and it affects your performance. Like you need to pay to get like a gun that's good enough to get the best gun. I think we're not going to get that, but that's horrible. I think it's tough because the gaming industry is moving away from games as a product where you buy a game once and it doesn't matter. The game's either a success or it's a failure. It's moving to games as a service. So you either buy a game or you get it for free, and then rather than you buy a game once and then never, developers or maybe have an update, but they don't look at it. It's moving away to kind of, when you're buying a game, you're getting to a platform. So you have this experience, and this experience grows. One of the best-selling game of all of the past couple of years is the latest Grand Theft Auto, and apparently they made more money on Grand Theft Auto Online with like the selling of stuff on there than they made with like Grand Theft Auto sales in the past couple of years. So that's just where the industry is moving. But I think there's a balance that has to be struck. I think the key items that are important, the key stories, when you're buying a game, you're expecting to have that. And I think I hate the fact that our industry is going there. So I think the only way for us to change that is to actually not buy these games. The problem is that if you pre-order, if you see Star Wars, or if you see like, oh, the new, like, this new EA game is coming out, like, I'm gonna pre-order. By doing that, the developer doesn't care if you end up, buying that extra stuff. Like, they already have your money. We need to, if you really want to see change, stop pre-ordering games, and then make your decision whether to purchase a game, whether or not it's worth it based on, what the people say.
Yeah, because you can pre-order and they're still, developing the game at that point. Like they're still doing a lot to the game to develop it, further production of it during that pre-order time period. Like they're by no means finished when that happens, and they can easily change things like that on you.
Absolutely. And some developers do a great job. Some, I think if you want to have that single player experience, there are some developers, like I think Nintendo is doing a great job. Like the new Wolfenstein with Bethesda, like they're all doing great jobs with that. But buy those games. Like, it's fine to pre-order the new Mario game when it comes out because you know that Nintendo is going to deliver on that. It's fine to pre-order new Wolfenstein. But if you have multiple offenders like in EA that keeps on doing this, we as consumers, the way we talk is with our wallets.
This episode was meant to be kind of an industry discussion, a lot of different topics, but kind of an industry topic discussion and going deep into a little things, a few things here and there. The last thing I want to talk about is the Esports Industry Awards. I'm curious your thoughts and opinions on this. To me, on my first impression of this, it does seem somewhat biased in its decision-making process and things like that. Now, I don't know everyone involved in it or the whole process and things like that, but just from at first glance, it seemed a little biased to me. It seemed kind of like a popularity contest, one man's opinion. I'm curious on your thoughts on the value of it. Is it just a popularity contest to you? Like, what are your thoughts on that, and is it worthwhile for the industry?
Yeah, so like I said, I used to work in music, and when it comes to the Grammys, like, everyone knows that like the winner of the Grammys Best Artist doesn't necessarily mean that like it's actually the best artist, or like the winner of the Best Rap Album. Like, it's just a bunch of people in a room that decide these things. So they're, like you said, they might be biased, or they might, I don't want to get that far, or they're just people's opinion, and they might not be the same people. They might not be the same people as you and your friend group. I like the idea that we have an Esports Industry Awards. I think it was a lot better than last year as far as production value and stuff like that. I think it's always cool that we have a time to thank people that have put a lot of effort in their craft, and to, rather than eagerly waiting for mainstream media to get to finally show us attention, we do that ourselves. On the other hand, just like any other award show, take it with a grain of salt. If your favorite streamer or like your favorite esports personality you think should have won it doesn't make it, it's just a bunch of people's opinions. And it's like any other award show. There's going to be some bias. There's going to be some of that. But, at the end of the day, it's fine for what it is.
Yeah, and I want to echo that because you make a good point, is that we should be honoring the people who put in a tremendous amount of effort, years and years of effort and grinding to get to the point where they are now. They should be celebrated. I fully 100 million% believe in that. I think as an industry, we could come up with something a little bit more creative than doing what everybody else does. We as esports or video gamers, the type of people we are, we pride ourselves in being unique and creative and different and cut from a different cloth kind of thing. And here we are celebrating people the same way that everyone else does. For me personally, I think it would be cool for us to come together as an industry and find a unique, more creative way of expressing our gratitude and in celebrating these people who have put blood, sweat, and tears into the industry. I think that would be neat, but definitely support acknowledging those people, and definitely a lot of respect to everyone in the industry who has been here from the beginning, the 15, 20-year veterans, and the people who are just getting into it now. I respect them equally, and I think it's great that we're celebrating those people.
Absolutely. And the good thing about esports is that's a combination of all these small communities, right? These smaller communities coming together, making this large community. So it'll be awesome if the FGC, gets together and it's like, it doesn't need to be this fancy award ceremony, but they're like, let's just every year we get to we count votes. And we pick who's our breakthrough streamer, who is our who made the best move this year, or something like that. And they just thank our own. It doesn't need to be as an industry as a whole. I mean, just like traditional sports, there might ESPN might have their big award ceremony, but then the NFL has their own awards, and the NBA has their own awards. Like, I think we can see things like that in esports as well.
You bring up a good point. It's like the community. The community drives it. The community supports it. It's about the community. It's always got to be community. If there's conflicting interests in it, and it's sponsor driven, or there's a lack of transparency almost that comes out of it when you start intermingling things like that. So I think community driven it should be the focus from one man's opinionated perspective.
No, I like it's tough, right? But the good thing about esports is that we're innovators. So I'm sure we get to the point where we thank our people in like such an innovative way that like we will look at it like 5 years from now. We're like, that we didn't think of this. Like, this is such a cool way of thanking the people. But I think the esports community is already very good at thanking the people that are doing tremendous work. Whether it's an official award ceremony is one thing, but it could be like constantly we're on Twitter and like you see like, I just want to thank this one streamer because they have, I was thinking about I was going through a lot of stuff and like I went through the streamer and like they really brought up my spirits, and like it'll get so many retweets and the community comes together and thanking that person. We have games done quick that just raises so much money. Like, we have ways to be thankful for our gaming, to be thankful for esports that doesn't involve these flashy parties, and I think they're equally as powerful.
Is there any shout outs or anything on your mind, last, touching points that you want to bring up, or any shout outs you want to give?
I want to, ask people to like, well, in a month or two, you'll see the WHAM network name pop up. Pay some attention once they come out. I want to thank you, Spencer, for having me. And most importantly, I want to thank, the esports community, because they've embraced me with open arms, whether it was 10 years ago when I was throwing LAN parties with friends, but especially these last couple of years. And it's just you won't find a community that's more accepting and more powerful.
For sure, totally. I want to echo that. Definitely agree. Well, thanks, man. Thanks, Maurice. It was a lot of fun. I got a lot of value out of our conversation. It was super insightful. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Maurice. I really appreciate it. I got a lot of value out of the things we talked about, and each week I really try and bring up some insightful conversations and have some insightful questions to get a little bit different look and explore esports a little bit differently each week. And I really think we nailed it this time. So I really appreciate you coming on and everything that you do and have done and continue to do for the industry and the community. Just super appreciate you and appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you very much.
And with that, I just want to remind everyone that if this all goes as planned, this show is just the beginning. Hey guys, real quick before you go, I just want to say thanks for listening and supporting the show. It really means a lot to me that you like it, and I hope that if you found some value from this podcast, that you'll share it on Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook, anywhere that you have a social media presence. I would love it if you would just share it with 3 to 4 people that might be interested in it. It would absolutely mean the world to me. It would help me get my name out there, help me get the podcast out there. I do this solely for the love of esports and for the love of getting to know people and hearing the stories of esports that I think are so awesome. So please, if you got value from this, if you enjoyed it, please share it with someone who you think might like it. And with that, I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.